It was just another routine flight, or so it seemed. The hum of the airplane engines and the soft chatter of passengers blended together in the background as Harry settled into his seat, preparing for a flight that would change his life in a way he never expected. But when the flight attendants walked down the aisles, nothing could have prepared Harry for the encounter that was about to unfold. The tension in the cabin was subtle at first, but it was about to explode. Harry had been flying for years, but this particular flight was different. Maybe it was the anticipation of the upcoming vacation or the fatigue from a hectic work schedule that made him unusually sensitive to the little things. He was a kind, soft-spoken man who had always tried to keep to himself and enjoy the journey in peace. As he made himself comfortable in his aisle seat, he glanced around. The other passengers appeared just as ready to take off, some buried in books, others chatting on their phones, and a few dozing off in the quiet of the cabin. But then, everything changed the moment the flight attendants started making their rounds. It wasn't even the first round of snacks or drinks when Harry first noticed her. The flight attendant who would turn this otherwise ordinary flight into a scene of humiliation and, eventually, karma. Her name was Lisa, and she was the type of flight attendant who walked with an air of superiority, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. Lisa passed by Harry's row, moving swiftly down the aisle, but she didn't acknowledge him or the elderly woman next to him or the family behind them. Instead, her attention landed on the young black man sitting in the aisle seat across the way, David. David was in his mid-20s, well-dressed and polite, his eyes hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses. He was returning from a business trip and had the look of someone who was eager to get home, but tired from a long day of meetings and travel. He greeted Lisa with a warm, friendly smile, but she didn't respond in kind. "Excuse me, sir," Lisa said, her voice cold and clipped. "You need to remove your sunglasses before I can serve you." David blinked in surprise. He had just boarded the plane, and the glasses were still perched comfortably on his nose, but there was no sign that he intended to cause any trouble. He looked up at Lisa, about to remove his sunglasses, when he noticed something strange. She wasn't making eye contact with him. Instead, she was scanning the cabin with a look of disdain, as though she were above everyone there. "I'm sorry, I didn't realize I had to remove them," David said politely. "But no problem." He took off his sunglasses, placing them in his lap as Lisa handed him the drink menu with a forced smile. However, her tone still held that same coolness, and it seemed like something about David just didn't sit right with her. She turned away, and Harry, who had been watching the whole interaction unfold, couldn't help but feel uneasy. Something about the way Lisa spoke to David felt wrong, as though her judgment went beyond the mere request to remove sunglasses. But he was used to seeing small acts of prejudice, subtle moments that didn't get addressed because they were too often overlooked. As the flight progressed, Harry couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He noticed that Lisa kept returning to David's row, but always with an air of condescension. Each time she offered him a drink or snack, she did so with a stiff smile, never making eye contact, never acknowledging his polite attempts at conversation. David, in contrast, remained calm, his composure never faltering as he answered her questions, his responses courteous. But Harry wasn't the only one who noticed the tension in the air. The elderly woman beside him leaned over and whispered, "Did you see that? She's been treating that young man terribly." Harry nodded, his heart sinking. It was clear that Lisa's behavior was not just about sunglasses. There was something deeper at play, something that didn't make sense but was hard to ignore. Minutes passed and the flight seemed to drag on. Harry couldn't stop watching Lisa's interactions with David, noticing how she took every opportunity to make him feel smaller. By now, the other passengers were starting to take note, and some began to exchange glances. It wasn't just the rudeness, it was the air of entitlement that radiated from Lisa, as though she felt she could get away with anything. And that's when it happened. As the captain's voice crackled over the PA system, announcing that they were preparing for descent, Lisa approached David once again. This time she had an issue with his seatbelt. "Sir, I'm going to need you to adjust your seatbelt," she said, standing over him with her arms crossed. "I'm not sure you're following the correct procedure. I'm going to have to report this." David blinked in confusion. He had already fastened his seatbelt, but he didn't want to escalate the situation. He calmly reached down, readjusting the belt, and looked up at her. "I think it's fine now. Thank you, but Lisa wasn't done. You need to make sure that you follow all the procedures, especially since we're getting ready to land. I'm going to keep an eye on you." David's patience, however, was running thin. "I understand. There's no need to be rude about it." The words were quiet, but they carried an undeniable weight. And that's when Lisa snapped. "You're right, you should understand," she said with a sneer. "You should understand that some people don't know how to follow the rules." Her eyes glinted with malice as she turned her back on him. The entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. But just as Harry was about to speak up, something incredible happened. The airplane jolted slightly, and the overhead compartment above David's seat popped open. A small bag, perhaps someone's carry-on, fell straight out and hit Lisa square in the back of her head. There was an awkward moment of silence as the entire cabin looked toward the incident. Then, as if on cue, a wave of laughter rippled through the plane. People weren't laughing at the situation, but at the sheer absurdity of what had just happened. It was like the universe had suddenly turned the tables on Lisa in the most unexpected way. Lisa, stunned, rubbed the back of her head and then glared at the source of the mishap. But when she looked up, she realized something. Everyone in the cabin had been watching. The smugness on her face was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that her actions hadn't gone unnoticed. For a moment, Harry could see it in her eyes. She was trying to recover her composure, trying to regain control of the situation. But the damage had already been done. The passengers were no longer passive observers. They were fully aware of her treatment of David. Lisa quickly moved away, but Harry saw her glance back one last time. This time, her gaze wasn't filled with arrogance. It was filled with a quiet recognition that she had made a mistake. David, ever the gentleman, didn't raise a fuss. He sat back in his seat, allowing the flight to land in peace. But as the plane touched down, Harry couldn't help but notice how, despite everything that had happened, David held his head high, a quiet dignity radiating from him. Karma, as they say, had struck. The flight attendants disembarked and the passengers filed off one by one. As Harry walked toward the gate, he passed David, who was calmly collecting his things from the overhead compartment. He gave him a nod of approval. David smiled back, the weight of the injustice seemingly lifted from his shoulders. "It's okay," he said to Harry. "It was just one moment, but sometimes that's all it takes." As Harry watched David walk away, he couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. The world, though imperfect, had a way of balancing itself out. And sometimes the right people did get what they deserved.